before we jump into any graphs or any of that sort, um, I have I probably came across your name in game a few years ago because I was trading a lot and you were building a lot. So when I was looking at, hey, who are the people that I have a lot of transactions with, your name popped up a lot,
A lot.
a lot, especially with rigs and with everything, every component of rigs, and that's where I first came across you. But that's because I never traded with ships. But for those of us that maybe don't know who you are yet, can you give us a quick introduction, who you are, what you do in game, and then we'll jump into some graphs.
Yeah, so I'm Sir SmashAlot. Like the overwhelming like philosophy around industry is you take like 100 units of wealth. It's just like trading. You buy something, transform it into something else. So you do a little bit of work to it, sell it, and you get 110 units back. And the whole idea is that if you reinvest it, it becomes an exponential growth function. So about 6 years ago, I joined a custom software developer, and just for fun, I went to a Microsoft Ignite conference and discovered Power BI. And I was like, talked to my boss, and I'm like, hey, like I like Excel. It's not something part of my work, but it could be something that we could use in the long run. Because and they're just like, yeah, sure, go have fun. And then got a little flack about like, hey, like we can't give you like customer data. I'm like, no, I'm fine. I got data. I'm good. Um, so I just played around with that. So I moved off spreadsheets to Power BI and SQL, and just built data tools for myself, and gained visibility of the whole market. Because prior to that, I just made Tech 2 ships casually because I covered the bills. And then about 2 years ago, I shifted from more of a corporate consulting role to full time data. And by that point, my tooling was quite mature, so my goals kind of shifted around. And then it just became like, hey, I got this playbook. It works. I'm just going to scale, 100 units in, 110 units out, 110 units in, 121 out, and just kept doing that, kept doing that, kept doing that. So now I'm at about 50 accounts. 16 of them are with a full SOT layout, so industry science reactions. 34 of them are for just reactions and skill point farming. I manufacture just in low sec, and that's to take advantage of the faction warfare bonus that reduces your industry taxes by 50%. So that's used to kind of concentrate assets, because you really just don't want to be moving around like 40 million M3 every week to save on indexes. Like you can, but it's expensive in terms of your time. So, and then in terms of what I do, I kind of focus on two different markets. Like you touched on one, which was the salvage market, and that's sort of the area in which I thrive in, which is sort of the market PvP element. But the area where it's kind of like the bread and butter, how to make money and not really think about it, it's sort of the liquid markets, which are your sort of Tech 2 ships with some casual capital building, a little bit of T3 production. Because if you want to make jump freighters, you're going to need to do hybrid component building. And if you can make hybrid components, you can make other capitals and you can make T3 hulls. So it's just a nice little add on there. Um, I have a small number of accounts that make Tech 2 ship rigs. That's kind of where probably the highest amount of admin is, just because the job links are small. But I only use a couple accounts there, but I still do it because it's just lucrative. Like Tech 2 ship rigs, like they'll always pay you money. You'll get your money back out fast. And yeah, it just really comes down to how much admin you want to do from restarting those slots. But it's a great market to go in. So highly recommend it for anybody that's new and starting out. And then, yeah, as for the structure rig market, if you play in salvage or structure rigs, you will have seen me for probably the last 5 years, but probably for the last 4 years. It's been my market. Like you can't do anything without seeing me. And that's just where I really love. Like I love market PvP. In a previous life, I was an equities trader, so it's just one of those things where you can get to scratch that itch. As for I don't know if you got any questions, but yeah, as for a time commitment, it's about 2 to 4 hours a day, 2 hours kind of during the workday, and then weekends is where I kind of do the admin bit, but the rest of the time is mostly just market PvP. Um,
So, um, before we jump into some of the more details, I think, what is your daily motivation? So if you say, you're spending about 2 hours a day, 4 hours on the weekend, how are you not burning out? Like what keeps you going?
Um, so like one of the interesting things with Eve is it was my sort of blow off valve. So I kind of come with a mindset that always has to be active, and Eve's kind of one of those conduits where you can put basically infinite energy in. And if you've ever worked in the corporate consulting space or have ever done like business intelligence work, like one of the um, kind of disappointing facts is you might provide a 5-year corporate plan for somebody, but you might not know the results for 5 years, and the results might be ambiguous. Where the fun thing with Eve is if you do something smart, you're going to know right away. Like if you're like at my scale, sometimes it takes like 12, 18 months to really see like good impact. But for a new player, if you're doing something right within 3 months, you're going to see those impacts. Even less than that, like within 3 weeks, you're going to see impact. So that allows you to then say, hey, I'm going to have a big goal. So my 2024 goal was I was having issues with getting composites from the market for T2 production. So I'm like, great, I'm just going to wait for the right CCP sale and I'm going to open a whole bunch of new accounts and solve my composites problem. I'm going to make a whole bunch of reaction accounts. So that was my goal for 2024 was wait for a sale, make a bunch of accounts, get them integrated, get the capital flow in there. And that's basic. Like if we bring up some charts, like you'll actually see the jump when those accounts
Yeah.
came into play.
And some of the
Um,
questions that are being asked in chat, like Crotus, how much profit does this generate? I think we have some graphs to go into that, but I want to just one or
uh,
two more questions before we go into
yeah.
the actual numbers that everyone's waiting for. So you said you're producing on LoSec. Are you mostly selling direct to player or Jita market?
So like the running joke is it's a spaceship game and I make ships and rigs, which are sort of the most common assets in the game. And that's kind of the two most common areas to be in. For ships and Tech 2 assets, it's almost all in Jita. Structure rigs, I'm everywhere in HiSec. And then capitals, I'm extraordinarily lazy. I literally contract them out in the location I build them in. Like they'll sell. Like so you set them the right price, they'll just sell. So that's basically what I do.
And they'll be profitable for you?
Yeah, like so when it comes so they like there's two I think two different um I would say market channels for something like Navy Dreads is you could be the high volume producer at low cost and you're trying to find a private buyer to where so like hey, I'm going to give you 50 Navy revelation issues and I'll give you a good price for it. Where if you make let's say 20 or 30 dreads a month, they're just going to sell on open contracts no problem.
Mm-hmm. And
So
how, like, you might not be moving capitals around, but you're moving the other stuff from LoSec to
yeah.
Jita. How do you do that safely? Like, how do you not get blown up on the way?
So what I tell people is if you want to avoid being ganked, learn how to gank.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you joined Snuff for a while, or what is it that you do in your free time?
Yeah, so one of the wonderful things about industry alts is they never undock, and they don't need to haul stuff. So they make wonderful suicide gank characters.
Mm-hmm.
So they you don't care if they're -10 because they don't undock. That you just use them for the slots,
Mm-hmm.
and you meet some great friends along the way.
Great. Okay. So let's look at some graphs then. What do you want me to
Yeah.
pull up first? What's the You sent me a
Like I
whole bunch
think
of graphs
Yeah,
before.
so I think the first one should probably be the 30-day summary so that people kind of get an understand of the scale. Because I don't think that's actually been mentioned yet. Um,
So this
so
is this is what you're talking about when you say 30
yeah,
day summary, right? Yeah.
yeah.
So what
So
are we
so
looking
when
at here?
so it's 30 days, so 1 month, so 7.5 trillion in revenue. Um, so the net the net profit is actually only a change in cash. It doesn't actually account for
Hmm.
expenditures. So there's also, I think, about 100,000 Plex is also purchased in that period. So in the last 30 days, we're looking at like a net positive cash flow of about 1.3 to 1.4 trillion. So pretty big numbers.
Yeah, yeah, pretty big numbers. Do you track profits religiously, or do you basically, now you've done it for so long, you pretty much know it's profitable and you just scale?
So if you go down, let's say, like a gap analysis approach, it is definitely possible, but I'm not filing taxes with anybody, so it's not really like worth that sort of effort. So for the most part, I focus on cash flow. Um, and like at the end of the day, like a general rule of thumb is if you're doing things right, a manufacturing slot's going to yield you about 400,000 like 400, yeah, about 400,000 profit per hour. Reactions about 200,000. And there's a lot of variability, but like long run over the course of a decade, that's basically what you expect. That's sort of like the free cash flow for those types of slots. You can earn more by exchanging, let's say, your time or risk or complexity. But that's basically what it is. So
and
you turn, yeah. So if you turn over more assets, you earn more.
and this escalated rather quickly in the last few months, right? I mean, the last few months have been very good too.
Yeah. So if we show, I think there's like the 5-year chart.
Yeah,
Um,
the
so
this is the 5-year chart. Yeah,
yeah, so yeah, so that yeah, so the yeah, that one there is the last 5 years. So that kind of represents when I went to shifted to just doing industry and got kind of got focused in it. So you can actually see when I moved across the country. You can actually see when um, I think it was just around 2019 is when I got full intelligence on the market. You can actually see when I
yeah,
started reinvesting. You can actually see when Lancers came out because I stopped doing Tech 2 production around kind of like kind of 3/4 of the way through 2022, or is it
because you couldn't
2023?
move them, or what? You didn't want to move them. Too risky.
I had no idea what the meta was gonna be like, so you can
Yeah,
actually see that sort of drop down, and then once you kind of figured out how they worked, you can literally see the bar go back up. You can
nice.
see the summer slump that we had this year, and then the pickup in the fall. The chart's a little out of date. I think I'm at today sitting around 4 trillion for November, which is bananas considering it's only 16 days in on November. But yeah, like the previous month was tiptoeing close to 6, so the 7.5 is largely a factor of some very interesting moves in the last month or so.
Yeah, and uh, I mean, overall production increased as well. Probably not this rapidly, and overall ISK supply increased, but the velocity of ISK is lower. So from this chart, I would dare to deduce that you're basically just taking over market share here. You're just capturing a bigger part of the market. It's not that people are necessarily spending more on rigs and ships.
Y- Yeah, so like there's a common myth that uh I guess gets told. So when CCP changed the market tax scheme, so they added in the tick rule and they added in relisting fees and added in a fairly substantial listing fee. uh, it kind of spooked people into thinking that they could come up with more cost efficient ways of interacting with the market. So if you had, 10 billion worth of stuff to move, don't list all 10 billion, list, one order of 1 billion and then relist later. And that's sort of a false way of looking at things. There's a lot of liquidity that you don't see on the market. So if you provide liquidity to the market, there's going to be a buyer or a seller that wants to fill those orders or take those orders. So when I need, let's say, R64 Moon Goo, I'll put up an order for 50 billion worth. And there's going to be someone that's been mining for a few months that goes, man, I got 100 bill to sell. Oh, geez, there's an order right here. Boom, sold. and I don't have to dork around with relisting fees. It's just done.
Absolutely,
Um,
and that's why your and my path crossed, because I am one of those people, right? Uh, I often I want to liquidate 50 billion, 100 billion at a time, or on the other side, I want to buy in large
yeah.
quantities. And for me, since CCP still hasn't granted me my change request for being able to buy multiple sell orders at once at the price that it's listed at, when I see a very large order, that makes me buy when I wouldn't buy even at lower prices at smaller orders. So I can totally understand how that is possible. On the other hand, y- one reason why you can take that risk is because you also have the liquidity to deal with it if it doesn't work, right?
Well, like so industry is like trading, and the sort of magical thing is over a long period of time, you can actually see the time value of players play out in the margins, and prices can go up and down, and you always get paid. Like I've said this lots. Prices go up and down, and industry players always get paid.
Hmm.
So even with the Marauder change, like I had something like 160 Marauders in queue while the patch notes were released. I still sold most of them for a profit.
Hmm. Because the
And the
market didn't
next
react quick
batch,
enough to
yeah.
the patch.
And I took a little bit of a haircut, I think, on Paladins, but otherwise, the next batch of T2 large, I'm just going to do a little less Marauders, a little bit more Black Ops. Prices will adjust, and by the time the next bit come out, I'll probably still make 10-20% margin. So, like the real fun, I think one of the big contributors to a really good October and November was people stopped producing because they feared that the drop in moon goo prices would crush their margins. But what ended up happening is there's now less buyers of moon goo, fewer producers. So moon goo prices dropped, dip prices didn't fall, and your margins got fat. Like
Hmm.
if I don't think no, I didn't share this with you, but like jump freighter margins are almost close to 50%. And I produce in a very expensive location because I made it expensive.
But that's also because
so
of the Goon move up right now. The jump freighters are out
so
of control.
so yeah, and like one character making jump freighters is 24/7 is earning 3 billion a day. Like it's just absolutely bananas.
Congrats.
So
So you need a lot of raw materials for this. Where do you get who are your suppliers?
literally the market.
Hmm.
So
Large buy orders.
um yeah, just large buy orders. You'll like there'll be a handful of people, let's say, that do buybacks in nullsec groups, and they'll say, "Hey, I have a crazy amount of pyrite, or I have a crazy amount of R4s, or I have a crazy amount of XYZ." And if the price is right and it's something I can consume within a couple months, I'll just take it. And it works great for both of us because if it's priced pretty close to market and I feel like I'm not buying at a high, which can kind of be tricky with the mineral market, but if I'm kind of buying at what I think is a fair price, it's kind of a win-win for everybody because they get a nice batch of liquidity, and then I get a big chunk of materials, and that's just, hey, something I don't have to deal with worrying about procurement for the next 3 weeks, a month, or whatever.
And do you buy how price sensitive are you on your resources? Like let's say, prices Mungu prices go up, you need to keep your production lines going. Do you buy at a premium?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So, the one thing, and if there's anybody that I've mentored in the past that watching this stream, their eyes are going to immediately roll. So the thing that I say to every single person I've mentored, the only thing that matters is busy slots.
Hmm.
Just
Like
keep
an
your
oil
slots
rig,
busy.
gotta keep
Just
pumping.
the factory has to keep moving. There might be times where you get caught off balance. Like the Marauder change is a very good recent example of that. I could say, you know, everybody should make redeemers, and a dozen people on this stream start making redeemers. We crash the price in 2 weeks. You'll just make something else the next batch. Like
Mhm.
for like the a good reason why the Tech 2 market is so generous is you have a very simple basket of inputs, but then you can make, 200 and some different outputs.
Mhm.
So at any given point, there's always something worth making. It just might change week to week.
Crota in chat is asking whether you could be running this operation out of Jita, and I'm guessing you can't because your index will be your industrial index would be too high. Like your profits would
Well,
be much lower.
well, yes and no. So, like, another myth is that you need to operate in a low index system, and the way that I flipped around on people is if a system has a very high index, it's probably because other people view that location as desirable.
Mhm.
So JITA has a high index because a lot of people view it as a desirable location to build.
Mhm.
Now, JITA being in high sec and an MPC station, you have two factors to consider. One, you can't do reactions, and two, the production efficiency is quite low.
Mhm.
So you're going to have to look for items that are potentially higher margin and have high value density so that you can turn over ISK in a location like that. But it's still totally possible. And it is possible because the index shows that it's possible.
So let's look at your your most profitable or your most produced items. I know I have a graph somewhere. Here it is. And this is a little bit hard to read, so I'm going to zoom in here. All right, but maybe you can talk about your most successful groups here. Um,
Yeah,
as I
so
zoom in.
the one group would be rig armor. So this would be things like your Tech 2 Trimarks, your I think auxiliary nano somethings or others. So anything that uses intact armor plates, and intact armor plates are fairly expensive, which means those rigs are fairly expensive. So they're quite value dense, but they're also consumed in high unit volume. So value dense, high unit volume means even at small margins, lots of market opportunity. So you can turn over literally trillions of them and earn 5% and earn quite well. Um,
And
Jump
for
Freighter,
those not in the topic at all, I mean, rigs they get destroyed every time that they are replaced, right? So they are there's a larger market there than for your average modules because average modules you can just switch out, right?
yeah, that and so I originally didn't do ship rigs and only exclusively did structure rigs, but I found that in order to have the effect and control on the market I aspired for, it actually made sense for me to make ship rigs so that I was constantly procuring all salvage types. So I
Hmm.
kind of decided, okay, how many slots am I comfortable with using in this sort of short duration reset cycle so that I can have continuous exposure to all salvage types, which means I can exercise control on the entire salvage market and kind of dictate all things at all the time.
Got it. So jump freighters are number two.
Yeah. So as you get more established as an industrial player, you might find that there's a particular market where you can just make this 24/7.
Hmm.
And for me, I think I got this going maybe about 3 years ago, where my goal was, what do I need to do so that I can have a single character making jump freighters 24/7? The second I deliver a set, the next ones go in the oven. And that was sort of the goal for, let's say, 2 or 3 years ago, was how do I get the machinery and job allocations and processes to set that up? And with jump freighters, it's heavy on reactions. Like you need a lot of composites. You don't need much for the advanced components, and you just need the one character making the feeder hulls, so the T1 freighters, and then otherwise you're good to go. So that's kind of why I do casually make dreads, because the character that makes the feeder hulls for the jump freighter production has idle time. So every once in a while, I'll be like, okay, you're going to make some you're making cap parts anyway, so make some cap parts for dreads. And when the balance works out, I'll make some dreads.
Nice.
So
And then Black
yeah,
Ops, I see more rigs, and I see Black Ops and Deep Space Transports there. This is for a full year 24, right? So this is not just
yeah,
Goons move up. This is just DSTs also move in high numbers.
yeah. So people lose a lot of hauling ships.
Mhm.
So, and someone's got to make them. They also do trade at a bit of a premium. So like one of the um, disadvantages to doing Tech 2 ship production at scale is there's a material like an M3 component to it. It's not like rigs where you can literally put in a trillion ISCA salvage into a jump freighter,
Mhm.
where you can fit 19 deep space transports into a jump freighter. So your volume constraints ends up becoming material. So it only becomes practical to do them at scale as if you're multi-boxing, let's say, a lot of logistic ships. But it becomes worth it if you have that capacity to move them. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like your profit per M3 moved kind of sucks for those two classes compared to, let's say, Marauders or Black Ops. Um, but your margins, your net margins are actually quite good for those.
Is there any other category here that you find particularly interesting to make, or?
The Yeah, like the structure rig market is just a completely different kettle of fish because it actually has nothing to do with production, because it's a class of items that only has one basket of inputs, salvage, and one blueprint, and it only takes 15 to 30 minutes to make the rig. So someone can ask me, "Hey, I'd really like a Sodio set," and I can have it cooked 180 billion ISK worth of items in 30 minutes,
Mhm.
delivered to their door. Like it's absolutely bananas. So the dynamic on that market largely comes down to control of salvage. And if you control salvage, you control the structure rig market.
And you control salvage mainly through buy orders in Jita?
Yeah, so the what I learned over the last 4 years is people will put up structures and they are price insensitive. So the thing you need to be aware of is that there is a mild substitution effect, but people will still put up structures. So if you keep in mind that there might be a substitution effect between setting up, let's say, a Sodio for your industrial park or a set of T2 Asbels, you can balance the price of salvage in such a way where you can actually raise the price of all rigs, but keep prices of salvage in such a way where I am procuring enough extra salvage that whenever there is a demand spike, the market always has liquidity. Because what I found early on is I would just let prices float.
Mhm.
And when someone would get their region glassed or someone would be allowed to move in, they would set up infrastructure and the market would get cleared out. I would get cleared out. People would say, "Hey, you're the guy that's always selling me the rigs. Can you make me more rigs?" And I'll be like, "Sorry, like you're also competing for salvage too." So what I learned is I could actually put in a price floor during the lower demand periods of time, accumulate salvage, and then release it during the demand spikes. And that's sort of a form of sort of monopolization where if anybody does try to compete, I can just buy them out and then they have no means of actually coming back into the market till I let them, more or less.
Mhm. Somebody's asking in chat, how much did the structure market change since CCP allowed pulling rigs from existing structures? That was just a very temporary thing, though, right?
It-
I imagine. Did you feel that?
yeah, so it was fascinating. I was completely wrong. I was because like absolutely fascinating. So I was expecting it's like, you know what, we haven't had regions get glassed for years. So all of a sudden it's like crap, you can now pull rigs. Well, if you can imagine anybody who's owned structures for the last 4 years go, well, I set up this constellation of medium rig structures. I now moved to an Asbel, and now we have an industrial park with a Sodio. like you think like all those medium rigs could just get pulled, all those large rigs could just get pulled, and then just sold on the market. So I was expecting a flood of materials. So about 2 weeks after the announcement, I thought, well, it's gonna take them about a week to pull the rigs, take them about a week to get them to JITA. So I'm just gonna get tank prices about 2 weeks after the announcement, and I did. You could see it in the history, um, and it didn't come.
Hmm.
Like I could see a handful of people that reprocessed some Sodio rigs, and they just sold the salvage to bids. I've seen some substitutes, basically some trades. So you'll see people trading in their T1 Tatara rigs for T2. But otherwise, people kind of did the smart thing and went, you know what, these rigs are hard to procure when we want them. So let's hold on to them and then just get
Absolutely.
more when we need them. So uh, I was completely wrong and it just worked out for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Super interesting though.
so yeah, like there was a little bit of selling, but it was probably maybe 10 to 20% more than the background supply rate, which is something I could easily absorb.
Um, Somebody's asking in chat as well. How would your net result look like if you were to offload logistics? If it's even possible for the volume you're moving.
Is that Beacon Boy? I'm pretty sure that's Beacon Boy. Um,
It's not.
so it is something that I've looked into. It is about probably a quarter of the time that I spend administering things. Yeah, plug for Beacon Boy. He's an absolutely amazing jump freighter pilot. Highly
We've
recommend
had
him
him on
if
the
you can afford
show
him.
he
And
was a guest on the show.
yeah, he's worked me for a few years. But the challenge is if you're trying to move 13 trillion in a month, break that up into 7 bill contracts that fit into a jump freighter. You
Yeah.
can't do that programmatically. So if I have to break it up and put it into a freighter myself and then go through the contract interface to set up the contract, I'm already halfway to my destination by the time I've set up my contract, so I might as well just do it myself. And at the scale of fleet that I run, I pay myself about 20 bill an hour to do it. So
Hmm.
um, it doesn't work out. If I could programmatically set up contracts, it might actually be worth my time. Or you could have like the other ways you'd almost have to allow someone uh, into your corp that had corp hangar access, and you'd basically have to have an arrangement that said like anything that goes into this hangar has to get moved here. But do you really want someone access to give access to like 2 trillion of assets at any given point in time? So it's just like
Nope.
no. So
So,
oh
you said earlier you manipulate the market every once in a while, right? If we
yeah,
have we have a graph here of stand up Excel set laboratory optimization 1.
yeah. There was the one question about 20 billion bill an hour. I
Yeah,
think I
go
think
ahead,
that would
answer
be
it. Yeah.
good. So like a jump freighter, like A to B cost on a flat rate might be around 500 mil. With 12 jump freighters, I can do basically the equivalent of 24 runs in 30 minutes. So, 24, so it'd be basically be like 48 times 500 mil. And that would sort of be the hourly rate of my fleet running for myself. So, and so opportunity cost
Yeah.
is it's quite high. Like I can't find another form of income that would top that. So but yeah, as for manipulating the market, so one of the things that's been quite systemic the whole time that I've participated in the salvage market was the salvage inputs for research rigs were comparatively cheaper than every other rig. And I I kind of noticed over time that when people were setting up Sodios, that they would set up a ship and structure and lab setup, which in my opinion isn't the best setup for an industry player. And it could just be from the substitution effect where, you're saving 40 billion. Um, so I decided to change that.
Hmm.
And it is that easy. Yeah. Yeah.
And is this the most recent graph? Yeah, it's This is November. This is right now. So
Yeah.
this is something that's happened like since August.
Yeah. Yeah. So the wonderful thing is if you know that you can move the market like that quite effortlessly,
Hmm.
you can say, you know what, I'm going to do it this summer and prepare for the, previous 6-12 months so that, my inventory is still at that, Jan, February, March cost level, even though I've been selling these rigs now for several months.
Yeah. But then again, you probably also have what would you say for these? Are you basically a monopoly on these?
Yeah, for the last 4 years.
Yeah. So and the price sensitivity is just not there. Somebody who's going to put up this structure, they're going to buy it at 25 or they're going to buy it at 40, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, like I gotta shout out to the original incumbent that I kicked out. I don't know if I can pronounce the name correctly, but it was Leknate 99.
Hmm.
We fought for probably about a year and a half over control of the market, and absolute Chad. Like it was probably the best market PvP I'll ever get out of the game. But in that time, like the laboratory rigs were selling for 12, 15 bill a pop. The ship and structure rigs were selling for 20 to 25. Um, and then once and what was fascinating is they would sometimes occasionally sell for 60, but it was because of the demand spikes and there wasn't really that liquidity that was available because there was no one really controlling it in the same way where they would absorb the excess during the slow times. So the thought was as well, we'll just let prices go up to that high point during the high demand times. Let salvage prices come down a little bit, but not all the way where they would if no one was really holding a price floor. And during those sort of slower points, it allowed me to actually accumulate trillions of inventory so that I could then release it during the demand spikes. And if anybody decided to compete, let's say by acquiring during that sort of slower point in time, they're actually acquiring at a naturally high price. So if I know they actually don't have trillions backing them, I can just let the price fall
Hmm.
and then buy them back up and then raise prices. And now they got to get back into the market at a higher price. So you can actually use that to effectively employ people that still participate in the market.
Hmm. So when in chat, there's been a few comments in chat. Somebody says "rich get richer," and it feels like Sir SmashAlot is running the 100 meters in a, I don't know, what was it, a car or something. Um, what like how do you feel about that? Do you feel, well, you did it in what, 5 years, from like more or less like very low level to 7 trillion a month? Like, do you feel like everyone can do this, or?
So I got full intelligence on the market about 6 years ago. And at that time, I had a net worth of about 2 trillion. And that's total net worth. That's like skill points, blueprints, probably a working capital amount of probably less than a trillion. And I entered the market with the incumbent that was likely worth way more than me.
He's in chat, by the
Uh,
way. I don't know if you
is
saw.
he?
Yeah.
Oh man.
He just
Oh,
said.
dude. Oh, absolute Chad. That's awesome. That
So
makes my
glad to
day.
bring you guys together. That's great.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Um, oh man, lost my train of thought. Yeah, he no,
Yeah. Can
absolutely
anyone do it? Can
best time.
anyone do it?
Yeah. Um, sort of. So like once I was able to take control, it largely just came down to making sure that there was no peer competitor. But taking control was kind of tooth and nail for about a year and a half. Like I think I had a sort of like a cold wallet liquidity pool of about 400 billion when I started. And during that competitive period, I had it down to about 50 billion. Because at one point we were trading relisting fees at 20 bill a day, just seeing who
Hmm.
could break each other. Like it was absolutely vicious. So now that I don't have anybody that's willing to trade like that, I just giggle at the person that's willing to, alarm clock at 4 in the morning, just to save themselves a little bit of fees. Because the real traders out there are willing to like lay down capital for control.
Hmm.
So you can so like if you're starting out, you have to view industry as a PvP activity. So this is kind of, I guess, I had a list of myths that I never touched, but like industry is a PvP activity. Eve is a PvP game.
Absolutely.
So if if you want to play in the illiquid markets like the salvage market, like the structure rig market, it is purely not actually a thing about industry. It is absolutely about competition. And if you enjoy the knife fight that comes from market PvP, you will love fighting in the structure rig market. Or I think like officer modules might be something similar, or faction or storyline modules might be something similar. Maybe like I don't think the AT ships are the same. It's little different, but that's sort of the idea. Like the illiquid markets are the knife fight.
Hmm. Yeah, fascinating. Do you brought some more graphs? If I look here, what are we? Blueprint replenishment.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I think this would be good for um this might be good. So there's a set of three charts that I showed
Yeah. Do you
that
want this
really
one?
helped me. These were actually things, I don't know if the guy from Eve Guru is watching, but these were some of the screens that I was going to share him, because this really helps me manage, essentially just keep the lights on.
Hmm.
So like the blueprint replenishment one, largely just because blueprint, there's a limitation with the API service where um, it only will return accurate details on the 25,000 rigs per corporation, or blueprints per corporation. So I try to keep that just under that, um, which at a large scale can kind of be difficult. So I kind of use my last 30 days of consumption and I compare that to inventory and then try to balance my research slots so that I don't run out. And then it's
So,
a very
do you have like what's your BPO library look like? I mean, do you like that's is that alone, trillions in value or?
probably. I have no idea. Like I think it's definitely appreciated since the changes to the SEC tax. Like a lot of the blueprints that
Yeah.
I own, like a lot of the high value ones, I would take high value blueprints to like random low sec systems and just drop it in an NPC station. And like the cost to research like a Dread BPO from ME9 to ME10 was literally millions. It'd take you 6 months, but who cares?
Hmm.
So, so yeah, they definitely appreciate it now that you can't do that.
I mean,
Um,
yeah, the new taxes are um
like
I mean, they look like a mistake, to be honest.
I think it was just an oversight. Like I think it
Yeah.
was well intentioned, but there were some second order impacts that hurt new players.
Yeah,
Like,
we're trying to get that fixed. As I'm just saying that we've let CCP know as the CSM. Let's just put it that way.
yeah.
Um,
But yeah. So let's go. I think there was
yeah,
two or three others that were
there's
pretty
a
important.
reaction planning sheet.
Yeah. So Um, like one of the things I would advocate for is if we wanted to help new players out get into industry, I would tell CCP to look at where the slot hours are in game. So like look at trade volumes and say, hey, what um what slot hours were taken to make those things happen. And what you'll find is, let's say, some groups whelp 200 paladins. The bulk of those slot hours are actually being reactions.
Hmm.
And where you see those bulky slot hours are where you could potentially allow new players to be. And, as CCP changing mechanics around, you could then change the component runtime on some items to offer opportunities for new players, which could be on the component items. But to kind of circle back on reaction planning, like reactions are dead simple to run. The number of inputs is quite small. The number of outputs is quite small. Um, so what I do is I run a long cycle time with reactions. So then I just try to balance my slot allocation with my upstream consumption. And once you kind of get it reasonably well fine-tuned, there's maybe only 2 or 3 characters that have a different slot allocation during each reset cycle. And yeah, I use a chart like that to kind of up and down slot allocations. And you can kind of see that on the composites there. I'm still buying a lot of composites from Jita. Like, it's kind of hilarious. I thought if I tripled the number of reaction slots that I had, I would no longer need to buy composites from Jita. But all it ended up doing was I'm just going to make more Tech 2 components and make more Tech 2 ships. And whatever I can get from Jita is just going to be great. It's just a bonus.
So, is do you look at which reactions are profitable, or do you just make what you need? And then, or do you ever look at
I
some reactions and say, look, this is just not profitable, I'm just going to buy them all?
I just make it.
Yeah, of
I just make it. Like so there's this trade-off, right? So
course.
um at a small scale, you can kind of look at the micro and go, hey, you know what? I think fermionic condensates have finally rebalanced. But for years they're almost never worth making.
Mhm.
Um, but you could look at, let's say, that basket and say, you know what, nanotransistors are crap. Like, I'm just going to make them. But that now adds some uncertainty to your procurement. So for me, it's keep slots busy. If I have to now outsource that component, that one item, to someone else in the market, they might not reliably provide me those items. And if that shuts down nanotransistors, that shuts down a bunch of different component types, and that shuts down all the end assembly. So for me, it was actually more valuable to have a balanced amount of production in-house so that I could guarantee that they're a product for the slots.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, it might be I might lose 5% on, let's say, the worst performing composite, which it doesn't matter.
And then we've
Like,
got component planning. Is the last sheet I have here for
yeah.
you.
So you start with basic goo, you move up to intermediate goo, you get composites, and then at the end of the day, you now have Tech 2 components, and those components go into your ships. You can kind of see it as like a layered cake. And it very similar to reactions. Components are fairly simple. If you're continually producing ships, you can look back at your sales or production history. You can then decompose that into, what jobs you need to run to maintain those similar sales, and, allocate, longer duration jobs. So it's almost like a base load supply of what you would need. Because people need ships. And if you're constantly making ships and selling ships, um, you can set up a fairly predictable and consistent supply chain.
And so the entire model is demand driven based on the sales that you make.
Yeah, pretty much. So I will after so the in the same day that the slots finish for reactions and component building, I'm now exiting my ship production queues as well. And then I will decide what ships I'm making based off of the spot market. And then that will slightly change my downstream demands, but over a longer time frame of, like, let's say about a month, the base load consumption of most materials is actually very consistent. um, it's usually not until CCP starts tweaking things, like how Tech 2 large ships now use more reactor units, that I've actually had to adjust things.
Mhm.
So
And so we'll take some more questions from chat, but I have a couple more. So why not do this in nullsec? Is it just um, the benefit versus drawbacks? So drawbacks, you're farther away from Jita, which is your market. You might be closer to your raw materials, at least some of them. But did you ever consider it? Did you ever try it? Null sec versus low sec versus high sec?
Um, so there are pros and cons. So there's sort of a political side of things. By remaining neutral, you can be friends with everybody.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, the game's 20 years old. Everybody kind of knows everybody at a certain point. Um, but the strict so there's a trade off. So in nullsec, you can procure items for really, really cheap, like really, really cheap. Because the alternative to people who are primary producers, so like your miners and stuff, their alternative is either you or you know
Hmm.
selling on the local market or paying the fees to Jita. So if you come in as a buyer and say, "Hey, I'll take all your stuff 10% less of Jita and you don't have to worry about it," that's really attractive to a primary producer. So your input costs can be quite low. The other advantage to nullsec is you can set up infrastructure in many locations. So then you can farm out low index systems if you set up constellations of structures. The disadvantage is if you can produce 5 trillion worth of crap, you're not going to find a buyer.
Hmm. You have
So
to ship it back.
you have to you just can't. So
Hmm.
um there was a period in time where I thought, you know what, maybe if I create 5 accounts, put them in each block, I'm not going to suck the oxygen out of every unit, every sort of group there. I don't want to piss people off by essentially taking market share from folks. um but the added complexity of dealing with now, I guess it would be close to about 13 different markets. And then the added logistics complexity of operating in, let's say, 6 different core areas between, like, let's say, high sec and then maybe, 4 or 5 different null blocks. Uh, it's just a lot of work. So I just thought, you know what, it would just be easier if I just scale where I am. Because it was still profitable. Like, even with a reaction index in the 20s and a production index in the high 15s, you're still profitable. So um, it's not really so it's not to say that one's better than the other. There are trade-offs. Like, you could do absolutely amazing in nullsec just from some of the core advantages that are allowed there that you don't get by, let's say, operating in low sec with the same model that I have.
Yeah, part of it is scale, right? I guess you'll have some higher margins, at least the possibility at higher margins. But if you want to do it at your scale, then your demand
Yeah,
is going to be limited, or you
yeah.
have to produce exactly what the alliance needs.
Well, and like that's like if there's some big folks out there, like I've heard rumors, but I think what ends up happening is they're not producing at a consistent pace. Like, if you looked at the 5-year chart, that's, every month there's something being built. Where I think in nullsec you are kind of like building and being ready. So when a big dread fight comes in, you're there to help out your crew and build the 200 dreads to replace it and get everybody back up to even. But you might be sitting around with those materials waiting for that opportunity,
Hmm.
and all the other downstream contacts that might happen from there. So, and that's a perfectly acceptable model. But I was kind of looking more for the philosophy of how much can I turn over in a month from a maximalist standpoint, while keeping administration time fixed.
Very good. Very cool. So, chat, if you guys have any more questions for Sir SmashAlot right now, would be it. There's one last graph we didn't talk about yet, which is
Oh
the
yeah.
assets under construction. That's last month, this month. When was this?
Well, it's going to change day by day. But this was, I think, just before the nerf, so I was ramping up. I think I had at that point 4 characters making Tech 2 large hauls, and Marauders were selling off the shelf really fast. Blops are selling off the shelf real fast. So I was just going hard into T2 large. So the job value was starting to get quite high. I think normally I sit around like 1.4 to 1.5 um, at any given point. But yeah, it was like, that's a new all-time record. I'll share that to Oz. That looks pretty cool. Um,
Very cool.
so yeah, and like, you see that like 72 Chronoses, they'll sell in 2-3 days. Like 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 there are certain markets where you can just hammer it and they'll just take it all.
Mr. Morty is asking, how many people do you think can do this at scale? There's a limited market, so it's not like 100 people can have this magnitude. No, there's definitely not room for 100 Sir SmashAlots. But what do you think?
Well, so what's funny is if you looked at the first chart that was shared, the
Mm-hmm.
manufacturing taxes paid was something around like 580 billion.
This one here.
The that represented
Yeah.
about 6.5% of all the manufacturing taxes paid in the game. That doesn't represent the uh, the like a lot of people produce at a much lower cost. Um, but if you just take the output, like in most cases, like I'm half of a region. So like you couldn't put a smash lot in Delve because I would be half of their productive output. So
Mm-hmm.
I would end up displacing, the good majority of the people that produce there. Even if I could get the materials.
Do you know
So because there's
anyone that is producing more in high and low
I would
sec?
I would love to find out. But statistically, there can only be 2 to 3
I haven't
because
met anyone.
because you just look at the economic statistics and go, well, they would have to get spread across 2 regions, and they would probably be really well known because they're just that guy that runs tribute or something, right? Like, um, so, and then if you kind of average it, let's say over high sec, it would mean that there's basically 2 of us making everything in the game, which doesn't make sense. So, but I think there's probably a large number of people that are in the sort of 500 bill to maybe 1 trillion a month. Like I suspect that that's quite common.
So what does the future look like for you?
Uh, oh, I'm done. I'm done, Eve. I am so excited.
I heard.
Uh, So, yeah, so come the new year, I'm gonna be shutting things down. Quite really, really excited. Absolutely love Eve. I wish I could keep doing it continuously. My 2025 plan was actually fairly straightforward. It was just a tripling of the jump freighter fleet and then probably a tripling of the reaction farm, which I could probably do by the end of the year, and that should have got me to about the 7-8 trillion mark fairly consistently. But I just had other hobbies
Mm-hmm.
um,
Good.
come up, and yeah, I'm right now in my wife's office. I got a whole basement to renovate. Got a backyard deck to build out, and I just kind of decided I can either do both really slowly, or say, you know what, I'm gonna do something else for a few years and let someone else take over the structure rig market and have fun with it, and yeah, kind of go on from there.
Right. And predictively, Chad is asking, can I have your stuff?
Absolutely not. Yeah. So the plan, like, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, I'll save up my assets, and if I decide to come back, like, I can come back. And yeah, in 5 or 10 years, if I go, yeah, I have no love for this, I'll probably just liquidate things and do the Plex for good. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, maybe in a couple of years I'll come back and continue as is and try to hit the 8 trill mark or try something else.
Yeah, make sure you put it in NPC station.
Yeah, yeah, like that's kind of um like it does make you wonder, like you see those like large tech 2 blueprint libraries that go and you think like, no one would intentionally do that and you think, "Oh, oh, they must have been really dumb." But like I think honestly, they probably had like a life tragedy. Because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like you see
Mm-hmm.
some of those big libraries go for on like abandoned structures and you just think, "Oh man, like there's no one would have actually done that." So kind of hope that the person was okay.
It's that or rage quitting. I mean, there are some
Yeah.
people that just do it out of spite. We just saw that recently. So yeah, there's, but certainly, uh, yeah,
So
interesting. I completely understand you. I've taken very long breaks from this game, and especially now with my second going into my second year as CSM, the time commitment is big. It's a big game. It's a big community, and yeah, I wish you the best of luck and recovery, and hopefully at some point we'll see you again in Eve.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I really appreciate you inviting me onto your show. This was a lot of fun. I hope people got value out of it.
Absolutely, I think so. A lot of people had been messaging me looking forward to you being on the show. So
Oh, that's
um,
great.
thanks,
Yeah, and
thanks so much. We're going to jump into the Pearl Abyss earnings, but yeah, you wanted to say something?
yeah, I was just gonna say to LecNet99, like reach out, get buddy. Like I'd love to chat.
I'll connect you
Um,
too. Very good.
awesome.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, and see you around.
Bye.